Mel Gibson was on the Joe Rogan podcast talking about the sequel to The Passion of the Christ.
That was a crazy movie because it was a great movie, but it seemed like there was resistance to that movie.
You got all those books, the Bible, you've got the different Gospels and stuff that people are quite familiar with.
What if one conversation exposed everything Hollywood tried to keep quiet? When Mel Gibson sat down with Joe Rogan and began talking about the Passion of the Christ.
When you're making this resurrection movie now, you also have this obligation. There's this, you're doing a very similar thing that you were doing with the Passion of the Christ, where this is a profound story.
The tone shifted. The jokes stopped. The room went still. A host who's heard confessions from presidents, fighters, and whistleblowers was visibly shaken. Whatever Gibson revealed wasn't marketing, nostalgia, or controversy for its own sake.
Yeah, there was a lot of opposition to it. And I don't know. I think if you ever hit on that subject matter.
It was something heavier, something that lingered, because this film was never supposed to exist. When Gibson announced it, studios didn't hesitate. They shut doors, raised alarms, and questioned his sanity. Not because it was expensive, not because it was risky, but because of the story it told and the power it carried. What followed was a battle fought behind closed doors. A filmmaker standing alone against an industry suddenly afraid of a narrative it couldn't control. And once you understand why this film scared Hollywood, you'll never see it or the machine that tried to stop it the same way again. Gibson's impossible mission. Let me take you back to the beginning to understand what Gibson was really trying to create. The Passion of the Christ wasn't conceived as just another biblical epic with sweeping cinematography and a predictable three-act structure. Gibson wanted something raw, more honest, more visceral than anything audiences had experienced before.
My contention is, when I was making it, it was like, you're making this film and the idea was that we're all responsible for this, that his sacrifice.
He dove into the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, studying every verse, every nuance, every detail about the final hours of Jesus Christ's life. But he didn't stop there. He pulled from other biblical texts, weaving together a tapestry that would show not just what happened, but the weight of what happened, the spiritual warfare, the human cost, the divine purpose behind every moment of suffering.
There really is no third option. See, if Jesus has not been raised from the dead, then the whole thing is a fraud and a joke.
This was going to be a film that demanded something from its audience. Not passive entertainment, but active engagement with questions of faith, sacrifice, and redemption. The opening scene sets the tone immediately. We're in the Garden of Gethsemane, darkness pressing in from all sides, Jesus kneeling in prayer while his closest companions, Peter, James, and John, succumb to sleep. The vulnerability is palpable. Here is the Son of God, fully divine yet fully human, sweating drops of blood as the weight of humanity's sins crushes down upon him. Then comes the adversary, Satan himself, slithering through the shadows, whispering doubts and temptations. A serpent emerges, but Jesus crushes its head beneath his heel, a deliberate callback to Genesis, to the very first promise of redemption.
And the Lord crushed the head of the serpent on Calvary. He stripped Satan from all of his authority.
Every frame is loaded with meaning, every shadow deliberately placed, every line of dialogue carefully chosen to resonate with theological depth. This isn't a movie you watch casually with popcorn. This is cinema that demands you lean forward, pay attention, and reckon with something larger than yourself. But while Gibson was building this artistic vision, he was simultaneously fighting battles on multiple fronts. During his conversation with Rogan, Gibson pulled back the curtain on Hollywood's attitude toward Christian storytelling, and what he revealed was startling. He noticed a pattern, a double standard that most people never talk about openly. Films exploring other religious traditions often received respectful treatment, careful handling, nuanced portrayals. But Christian stories? They were frequently approached with skepticism, even hostility. Projects were dismissed as old-fashioned, too serious, out of touch with modern audiences. Gibson felt this resistance personally. Studios that should have been scrambling to finance a project from an Oscar-winning director suddenly had cold feet. Colleagues who had worked with him for years started distancing themselves. The message was clear. This particular story wasn't welcome, and neither was the man trying to tell it. Gibson's Catholic upbringing meant this film wasn't just professional ambition, it was personal mission.
It's very ambitious, that's all I'll say. It took a long time to write. It's really ambitious, and it goes from like the fall of the angels to the death of the last apostle.
He couldn't walk away, even when the smart business move would have been to pivot to something safer, something more palatable to industry gatekeepers. His faith demanded that he push forward, that he create this film regardless of consequences to his career, his reputation, or his bank account. And push forward he did, often financing the project himself when traditional funding dried up, assembling a team of believers who shared his vision and weren't afraid of controversy. What emerged from this crucible of opposition was something unexpected. A film that would become one of the highest-grossing R-rated movies in history, proving that audiences were hungry for exactly the kind of bold, uncompromising storytelling that Hollywood insisted nobody wanted. Gibson's Impossible Mission, where Gibson's conversation with Rogan took an even darker turn, because the resistance to his film wasn't the only secret he was ready to expose. Gibson began speaking about the institution he loved, the Catholic Church, and the painful truths hiding behind its ancient walls. For someone raised in deep Catholic tradition, these weren't easy admissions. The church represented comfort, community, connection to something eternal. But Gibson had come to realize that silence in the face of corruption wasn't devotion, it was complicity. He spoke carefully but clearly about figures like Theodore McCarrick and Cardinal Wuerl, men who held positions of tremendous spiritual authority while covering up horrific abuses. Children had been harmed, and instead of justice, there had been protection for perpetrators, transfers to new parishes, legal maneuvering to avoid accountability. Gibson's disappointment extended even to the highest levels. He had hoped Pope Francis would represent a new era of transparency and reform.
This is Pope Francis' personal look at history, how the human suffering caused by wars and economic crises shaped his life and worldview.
But instead found more of the same institutional self-preservation. The church that began with radical messages of love and sacrifice had become, in many ways, just another power structure more concerned with protecting itself than serving the vulnerable. Gibson described it as two churches existing simultaneously, one that genuinely tried to live out its founding principles, and another that operated behind the scenes, pursuing agendas that had nothing to do with spiritual mission. He referenced strange historical moments, like the papal election in the 1950s that produced both black and white smoke, a sign of confusion and possible manipulation. He talked about Pope John XXIII choosing a name previously used by an anti-pope, adding layers of mystery to already murky institutional politics. What made these revelations particularly powerful was Gibson's tone. This wasn't bitter ranting or conspiracy theorizing. This was grief. The sorrow of someone watching an institution he loved fail to live up to its own ideals. He pointed out that the Vatican, functioning as its own sovereign state, made accountability nearly impossible. Priests accused of abuse were simply relocated rather than prosecuted.
Hundreds of names, work histories, and background information of Catholic priests in Illinois accused of abuse,
allowing them to harm more children in new communities. One case involved a priest who abused over 100 children before being transferred to another church where the pattern continued. For Gibson, confronting these truths meant risking alienation from the community that shaped him, but remaining silent felt like betrayal of something even more important. This is the moment when Rogan's emotional response became visible. Here was Gibson, Hollywood maverick and controversial figure, speaking with raw honesty about institutional failure, personal faith, and the cost of telling difficult truths. The weight of it, the sincerity of it, the courage required to speak publicly about these things, it broke through Rogan's usual interviewer detachment. Tears formed. The conversation had transcended typical podcast dynamics and become something more intimate, more real, more human. The emotional intensity in that room wasn't manufactured for clicks or views. It was the genuine response of two men grappling with profound questions about integrity, corruption, and what it means to stand for truth when doing so comes at tremendous personal cost. Critics versus audiences. The battle begins. Let's shift back to the film itself, because the story of its creation contains mysteries and miracles that sound almost too extraordinary to believe. When The Passion of the Christ finally reached theaters, critical response was deeply divided, which only added to the cultural conversation surrounding it. Roger Ebert, perhaps the most influential film critic of his generation, awarded it a perfect 4 stars.
Roger Ebert. As much as he loved to praise and celebrate good films, he also loved to point out their flaws,
calling it the most violent and intense film he had ever witnessed. Ebert, raised in religious tradition himself, wrote that he had never truly understood the depth of Christ's suffering until experiencing Gibson's unflinching portrayal. Other critics like Richard Corliss praised the film's sincerity and artistic ambition, while Armand White compared Gibson's directorial vision to Carl Theodor Dreyer, a master of spiritual cinema. These weren't casual endorsements. These were serious critics recognizing something significant, even if they couldn't always articulate exactly what that something was. Yet controversy swirled from multiple directions. Before the film's release, a joint committee from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and the Anti-Defamation League reviewed the script and expressed serious concerns. They worried that Gibson's portrayal of Jewish religious leaders pressuring Pilate into crucifixion could reinforce dangerous historical stereotypes that had fueled anti-Semitism for centuries. The Catholic Church itself had formally rejected these interpretations during the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, and many Protestant denominations followed suit. The committee feared Gibson's film could undo decades of interfaith dialogue and healing. These weren't frivolous concerns. History showed how such narratives had been weaponized to justify persecution, violence, and hatred. Gibson maintained that his intent was to show humanity's collective responsibility for Christ's death, not to single out any particular group, but the debate highlighted how fraught any retelling of this story inevitably becomes. Some scholars also noted that Gibson included scenes with no biblical or historical basis, like Judas being tormented by demonic children. Gibson's response was straightforward. This was an artistic interpretation meant to convey spiritual truths, not a documentary recreation. He was using cinematic language, symbolism, and visual metaphor to explore themes of guilt, redemption, and spiritual warfare. The film walked a tightrope between historical representation and theological meditation, which meant different viewers brought radically different expectations and left with radically different experiences. Some found it deeply moving and spiritually transformative. Others found it gratuitously violent and theologically problematic. Very few walked away neutral. The intensity of debate surrounding the film only amplified public interest. People who might never have considered seeing a religious film suddenly felt compelled to judge for themselves. Church groups organized mass viewings. Religious leaders delivered sermons analyzing its theological implications. Media outlets ran countless stories dissecting every frame, every choice, every implication. Gibson had succeeded in creating something that refused to be ignored, a work that demanded response, whether positive or negative. In an entertainment landscape increasingly dominated by safe, focus-grouped content designed to offend no one and challenge nothing. The Passion of the Christ stood as a deliberate provocation, an artistic statement that valued conviction over consensus. Lightning strikes and miracles. The making of The Passion of the Christ was far from ordinary. It was a production where the line between filmmaking and the supernatural seemed to blur. Jim Caviezel, cast as Jesus, endured excruciating physical suffering to bring authenticity to the role. The cross he carried weighed 30 pounds, and during one take, it dislocated his shoulder. During the scourging scene, he was struck twice by the whips, once knocking the wind from his lungs, another leaving his hands bleeding. His pain wasn't acting, it was real, and that raw intensity translated to the screen in ways no special effects could replicate. Then came the lightning. Assistant director John Michelini was struck twice during filming, while Caviezel himself reportedly suffered a strike during the crucifixion scene, miraculously unharmed. Lightning, in biblical tradition, signifies divine power and judgment. Were these accidents or something else? The crew couldn't explain it, yet the incidents created an atmosphere where the natural and supernatural felt dangerously close. Gibson's choice to eventually add a musical score, which earned an Academy Award nomination,
2004 Emma Award for Best Film Production goes to The Passion of the Christ,
only deepened the emotional and artistic resonance of the project. Transformations extended beyond the physical. Luca Lionello, who played Judas Iscariot, entered production as an atheist and left a believer, profoundly affected by exploring betrayal and redemption day after day. Maya Morgenstern, portraying Mary, was secretly pregnant during filming. A quiet, poignant symbol of death and resurrection intertwined with the story she enacted. Gibson also shared reports of miraculous healings. A 6-year-old girl with severe epilepsy went an entire month seizure-free after filming, and others reportedly regained lost senses. Whether divine intervention, coincidence, or psychological transformation, these events gave the cast and crew a sense that they were part of something far larger than a movie. One scene perfectly embodies Gibson's vision. After the crucifixion, Jesus' body is placed in Mary's arms, echoing Michelangelo's La Pietà in St. Peter's Basilica. The composition captures grief and grace, devastation and dignity, human sorrow and divine purpose. It has become one of the film's most iconic and moving moments, transcending religious tradition to speak to universal themes of maternal love, loss, and hope. In every strike, every pain endured, every transformation witnessed, The Passion of the Christ became more than a film. It became an experience, a phenomenon where art, faith, and reality intertwined in ways few could have anticipated. Hollywood, proven wrong. Despite all the controversy, or perhaps because of it, The Passion of the Christ connected with audiences on a massive scale. It grossed over $600 million worldwide, becoming one of the highest-grossing R-rated films ever made, and proving that appetite for serious religious cinema remained strong despite Hollywood's skepticism. People didn't just watch it once. They returned, multiple times, bringing family members, church groups, friends who needed to see what everyone was talking about. The film became a cultural phenomenon, sparking conversations about faith, violence, art, and the intersection of all three. It reminded viewers of the cost of redemption, the reality of suffering, and the power of sacrifice. Whether people loved it or hated it, nobody could deny its impact. The commercial success validated Gibson's instincts and exposed the disconnect between Hollywood executives and actual audiences. While industry gatekeepers insisted that religious content wouldn't sell, that modern viewers had moved beyond such antiquated interests, the box office told a different story. Millions of people were hungry for substantive spiritual content, for stories that engaged with ultimate questions about meaning, purpose, and transcendence. They wanted films that challenged them rather than simply entertaining them, that made them think and feel rather than just consuming their time. Gibson had bet his career and his fortune on the belief that such an audience existed, and he won that bet spectacularly. The film's impact extended far beyond ticket sales. It sparked countless discussions in churches, synagogues, mosques, and secular spaces about the nature of sacrifice, the reality of suffering, and the possibility of redemption. Pastors used it as a teaching tool. Theologians debated its merits. Families wrestled with whether children should see such graphic violence. College courses analyzed its cultural significance. The film became a cultural touchstone, a reference point in ongoing conversations about faith, art, and the intersection between them. Even those who never saw it couldn't escape its influence on broader cultural discourse. Gibson's achievement wasn't just creating a successful film. It was demonstrating that audiences craved bold, uncompromising artistic visions that took risks and challenged conventions. In an era increasingly dominated by sequels, reboots, and safe bets designed by committee, The Passion of the Christ stood as proof that singular artistic vision still mattered, that conviction could triumph over calculation, and that sometimes the most controversial path leads to the most meaningful destination. What comes next? The resurrection. Mel Gibson isn't finished with the themes that defined The Passion of the Christ. During his interview with Joe Rogan, he revealed that for 6 to 7 years, he and screenwriter Randall Wallace,
I know when I first started it was kind of confusing, but then I got really good at it.
have been developing an even more ambitious project, a film about the resurrection, told not in conventional linear fashion, but as a cosmic exploration of the battle between good and evil. Gibson wants to show how that singular moment in history connects to everything before and after. He's diving into ancient texts, theological debates, and historical research to craft a narrative that challenges audiences to see a familiar story through entirely new eyes. For him, the Gospels aren't myth. They are history, evidenced by the unwavering testimony of Jesus' apostles, all of whom died rather than recant what they witnessed. As Gibson asks, who dies for something they know is a lie? That question, he believes, validates the supernatural claims at the heart of Christianity. The resurrection remains the hardest part of faith for many. The idea of someone executed, buried, and then walking out of a tomb defies the natural order.
You know, the resurrection of the Christ being the sequel. Before we even get into that, though, I think we have to address the fact the first film came out in 2004.
Gibson admits that for much of his life he accepted these claims because others believed them, but over time he sought his own understanding. That personal journey now informs everything he creates. He isn't interested in preaching to the converted or producing content that merely confirms existing beliefs. He wants skeptics and believers alike to wrestle with profound questions about existence, meaning, and what happens when life ends. This new project is also deeply historical. Gibson aims to show the world into which Jesus emerged, the political tensions, religious expectations, and cultural realities that shaped how people responded to his ministry. He portrays the apostles not as perfect saints, but as flawed, complex humans transformed by an extraordinary experience. He examines the empire that sought to crush this movement and the underground community that kept it alive against impossible odds. At its core, he wants to dramatize the ultimate mystery of Christian faith, that death does not have the final word, that love triumphs over hate, and that resurrection is not just a theological idea, but a lived reality capable of transforming everything. For Gibson, this work is not about commercial success or career redemption. His reputation and financial security are secure. He pursues these stories simply because he believes they matter. He is willing to face criticism, controversy, and industry resistance because he believes certain truths demand to be told. The Rogan interview revealed the depth of Gibson's conviction. Rogan, known for challenging guests, was visibly moved by Gibson's honesty and vulnerability. This was not a celebrity promoting a product. It was an artist explaining why he creates, what drives him, and what he is willing to sacrifice for stories he believes in. From exposing institutional corruption in the church he loves to recounting supernatural events on set, Gibson laid bare the risks and consequences of pursuing a vision against overwhelming odds. The story isn't just about a film. It's about faith, integrity, and the courage to stand alone. It raises questions that extend beyond Hollywood or religion. When institutions suppress truth, who speaks out? When stories are silenced, who tells them anyway? And when conviction clashes with convenience, who chooses courage over comfort? Gibson's work reminds us that some stories are worth every sacrifice, and some truths refuse to remain hidden. So what's the hidden truth that brought Joe Rogan to tears? It wasn't just one revelation, but an accumulation of them. The truth that making the Passion of the Christ required Gibson to stand virtually alone against an industry that didn't want this story told. The truth that the church he loved harbored dark secrets of abuse and corruption. The truth that supernatural events occurred during filming that defied rational explanation. The truth that art created with genuine conviction can transform lives in ways that commercial entertainment never will. The truth that faith sometimes means suffering, that speaking honestly means risking everything, and that some stories matter enough to justify any sacrifice required to tell them. These truths cut through the noise of our cynical age and reminded both Rogan and his millions of listeners that sincerity still exists, that people still create art for reasons beyond profit, that faith still moves mountains, and that sometimes the most controversial stories are the ones most desperately needing to be heard. Gibson's journey with the Passion of the Christ and his ongoing work exploring resurrection themes represents a refusal to compromise, to play it safe, or to let others dictate which stories deserve to be told. It's a reminder that great art often emerges from struggle, that conviction matters more than approval, and that speaking difficult truths requires courage that few possess. The film itself remains divisive more than 2 decades after its release. Some view it as a masterpiece of spiritual cinema, a work of profound artistic and theological significance. Others see it as problematic in its violence, its historical liberties, and its potential to reinforce harmful stereotypes. Both perspectives contain validity. Great art often provokes strong reactions precisely because it touches something deep, something that can't be easily dismissed or categorized. The Passion of the Christ forces viewers to confront uncomfortable realities about suffering, sacrifice, and the cost of redemption. It doesn't offer easy answers or comfortable reassurances. Instead, it demands that we wrestle with difficult questions about human nature, divine purpose, and the price of salvation. If this story moved you, if it challenged you to think differently about faith, art, or the cost of conviction, then Gibson accomplished exactly what he set out to do. He created something that refuses to be ignored, that demands engagement, that provokes genuine emotional and intellectual response. Whether you agree with his theology, appreciate his artistic choices, or share his faith commitments matters less than whether you're willing to wrestle with the questions his work raises. That willingness to engage, to question, to feel deeply, that's what transforms entertainment into art and viewing into experience. The conversation between Mel Gibson and Joe Rogan revealed layers of truth that most celebrity interviews never approach. It showed us that behind every controversial film lies a human story of struggle, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to vision. It reminded us that institutions we trust can harbor corruption that demands exposure. It suggested that reality contains mysteries we cannot fully explain through materialist frameworks. Most importantly, it demonstrated that authentic vulnerability, even from tough, controversial figures, has power to move hearts and open minds. moments. That's the real secret Gibson shared, not just details about a film, but a window into what it means to create with conviction, to stand alone when necessary, and to believe that some stories carry truths too important to be silenced, regardless of opposition, controversy, or cost. And in a world of calculated messaging and careful image management, that kind of raw honesty remains revolutionary, powerful, and yes, moving enough to bring even the most hardened interviewer to tears. The hidden truth isn't hidden anymore. It's out, there for anyone willing to look, to listen, and to let themselves be transformed by stories that matter, stories that cost something, stories that change everything.